Spoiler warning. Potential spoilers for all of Game of Thrones. It's been over a year since the finale of Game of Thrones, so I figure now is as good a time as ever to revisit the first season. I plan to go episode by episode, looking at if I think it's good and if I think it holds up now that the series is over. I'll give an MVP, biggest loser, best quote, and number of named character deaths. Let's get started. Episode 1, Winter is Coming. The pilot episode of the series. I think as a pilot it does a good job of introducing the world, key players, and setting up the main stories. Going back, it feels a little slow, and I know not everyone is sold from the first episode. There's plenty of interesting or exciting moments, but also all the characters and jumps to different parts of the world can be a little bit confusing or overwhelming. The key moments from this episode are character introductions, setting up the presence of supernatural elements, the death of the former hand, Jon Arryn, and the assignment of a new hand, Ned Stark. The marriage of Daenerys to Khal Drogo, and, of course, Bran being pushed from the tower for discovering the secret affair of the Queen Cersei Lannister and her brother Jaime Lannister. Aside from the pacing, the only other issue I have with this episode is due to the showrunners wanting to clarify the death of Jon Arryn. They put in a scene that ends up being completely misleading and untrue, making the Lannisters admit guilt in his death when later on it's found out they didn't do it. The only explanation for this could be that maybe they were also intending to poison him. Overall, a strong opening. While there isn't really a clear MVP of the episode, I guess I'll give it to Bran for discovering the secret. Bran's cost for that could make him the biggest loser, but I'll give that honor to Waymar Royce for being the first character to die in the series. The best line of the episode has to go to the last one, when Jaime says, "The things I do for love." Number of deaths in episode 1? 4. Episode 2, The Kingsroad. Episode 2 is an improvement from the first episode. The ball gets rolling as we go further into each character. A lot more starts to happen in each episode, with characters moving in different directions. In Winterfell, we find out that Bran survived, but is in a coma. An assassin comes in an attempt to finish him off, but is stopped by Catelyn and Summer. Catelyn suspects the Lannisters' involvement. On the road, we get two stories. Firstly, Jon and Tyrion headed north, where Tyrion dissipates Jon's delusions of grandeur for the Night's Watch. The second story on the road is the king and everyone traveling with him back to King's Landing. As they travel, they stop and discuss what to do about Daenerys marrying Drogo, while Arya gets into a fight with Joffrey, which leads to her releasing Nymeria to the wild, but Lady being killed as a punishment instead. Meanwhile, over the sea, Daenerys is struggling to integrate into Dothraki society, not enjoying her marriage or the lifestyle. She seeks help in making her relationship to Khal Drogo better from her handmaiden Doreah. My only issue really with this episode is that I find the story surrounding Daenerys to slow the pacing. It just feels a little too detached from the rest of the story at this point. And I know that goes on for a while. MVP of this episode goes to Tyrion. His impact on both Jon Snow and Joffrey is seen pretty well in this episode, and he has many of the best lines. The biggest loser is Joffrey, for getting slapped around by his uncle, then beaten by Arya. While I'm tempted to give the best line to Slap for Tyrion slapping Joffrey, I don't think onomatopoeia counts as a quote. So instead, I'll go with Tyrion's line, "Speaking for the grotesque, I'll have to disagree. Death is so final, whereas life is so full of possibilities." Number of deaths in this episode, 3. Episode 3, Lord Snow. This is the episode I feel like Game of Thrones is in full stride. We are introduced to a lot more of the major characters through the small council. With the bigger stories happening at King's Landing and the Wall, I'll start with the other places. At Winterfell, Bran wakes from a dream about a three-eyed raven. He is told he will never walk again, which upsets him. Overseas, Daenerys is now adjusting to be a Khaleesi of the Dothraki people. She finds out she's pregnant. Jorah Mormont leaves, knowing where that goes, to inform Varys. Jon Snow and Tyrion have arrived at the Wall. Jon isn't getting along with his new brothers, and his formal training widens the gap between them. Tyrion and Benjen each give Jon some advice, which helps him come around to his brothers. In King's Landing, we get to meet the various members of the small council. Ned finds out that the crown is very in debt to both Tywin Lannister and the Iron Bank. Catelyn arrives at King's Landing and is taken under Littlefinger's protection. She finds out that the dagger used by the assassin once belonged to Littlefinger, and he informs her he lost it in a bet to Tyrion. This further implicates the Lannisters. Arya and Sansa are still mad at each other for what occurred on the Kingsroad. Arya wants to become a swordsman, so Ned hires her a teacher. I don't really have any problems with this episode. It maybe lacks action, but the character developing, dialogue-heavy episodes are generally what I consider to be the best of Game of Thrones. MVP of the episode for me goes to Littlefinger. We are shown a glimpse of how clever he can be, and knowing what is to come, we already see his schemes beginning. Biggest loser for this episode goes to Viserys, for showing how weak he truly is. My favorite quote of the episode is from Jaime in a scene I didn't really touch on as it was just kind of filler. But when he's talking to Robert and Barristan about last words, he said the same thing he'd been saying for hours, burn them all, referring to when he killed the Mad King, showing our first glimpse of Jaime's good side. Number of deaths? None. Episode 4, Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things. This episode, the show becomes a bit of a detective series, with Ned beginning to investigate the mystery of Jon Arryn's death. He visits some people and asks about Lord Arryn, including a boy named Gendry, who we find out is the bastard of Robert. He also intends to visit Sir Hugh of the Vale, who is Lord Arryn's squire, but in a joust with the Mountain, Gregor Clegane, he is killed. Meanwhile, in the north, Tyrion has made his way back down to Winterfell and has designed a special saddle so Bran can ride again. He then continues south, where he runs into Catelyn, who takes him captive for the attempted murder of her son. At the Wall, we are introduced to Samwell Tarly, an overweight, cowardly boy who joins the Night's Watch. Jon becomes friends with him and tries to help him acclimate to the lifestyle at the Wall. This episode is really great for giving just enough information that as a viewer you can piece the mystery together, but for rewatching we're just waiting for Ned to figure it out. My MVP of the episode is Ned. He is the main character here and pushes the narrative forward. The biggest loser is a tough one, but I'll go with Sir Hugh for first being arrogant and then getting himself killed. Quote of the episode goes to Tyrion when he drops the name of the episode with the line, "I have a tender spot in my heart for cripples, bastards, and broken things." Number of deaths? 1. Episode 5, The Wolf and the Lion. Episode 5 starts to see a little action return to the series, as well as the continuation of major plots. Catelyn takes her prisoner Tyrion to her sister Jon Arryn's widowed wife Lysa for his trial. She is unstable and her son, the Lord of the Vale, Robin, is sickly. They throw him in the dungeons. At King's Landing, the small council discusses Daenerys' pregnancy, and the king commands that she be assassinated to prevent a future war. Ned advises against this, and quits his position as Hand. Before leaving back to Winterfell, Ned checks one last lead in the case of Jon Arryn's death, but is attacked by Jaime in the streets. Jaime kills Jory and the rest of Ned's guards, but leaves Ned injured, demanding his brother be returned. This episode continues the strong writing of the mystery from the previous episode, and the fight at the end, though short, is pretty good. I also like that knowing what is to eventually come, Robert is right about his thoughts on Daenerys. My MVP of the episode is Tyrion for gaining some favor with Bronn and endearing himself enough to Catelyn that she has some doubts of his guilt. The biggest loser goes to Ned. If he just got out of King's Landing, he wouldn't have lost his guards or been injured. For best quote, Littlefinger and Varys each had some clever remarks, but it goes to Cersei for a line she has when answering Robert what keeps the kingdoms together with our marriage. Number of deaths, 5. Only Jory of any importance, though. Episode 6, A Golden Crown. This one is where a lot of the early setup for this season starts to see some payoffs. Bran's saddle is ready, and he goes out riding it. He gets attacked by some wildlings. Robb and Theon kill 2 of them and take the other, Osha, captive. In the Vale, Tyrion demands a trial by combat, to which Bronn volunteers to fight Ser Vardis for him. Bronn is quick and evades Ser Vardis' attacks before finishing him off. Tyrion walks free and Bronn leaves with him. In King's Landing, Robert makes Ned be Hand again and leaves for a hunting trip, wanting the problems between the Starks and Lannisters resolved by the time he comes back. However, while Ned is in charge, he hears about the Mountain attacking villages in the Riverlands. The Cleganes are bannermen of the Lannisters, so when Ned orders Lord Beric Dondarrion to arrest him, it continues the feud. Ned then finally pieces together the puzzle when Sansa talks about her potential kids with Joffrey having Lannister golden hair, making Ned realize they don't have any Baratheon genes. Overseas, Daenerys is gaining respect from the Dothraki, which makes Viserys jealous as he has never seen praise like that despite being a prince. He demands Khal Drogo get him his golden crown, so he melts gold over his head. This episode finally sees Ned piece together the puzzle viewers have known for a while, and gets some action happening in Daenerys' story. It also sees some early signs of Daenerys' personality, with her cold reaction to her brother's death. The MVP of the episode, I think, has to be Tyrion, though with Bronn's help for getting free. The biggest loser is easily Viserys, for his childish behavior and death. While Bronn and Tyrion both have some great lines, the best quote goes to Khal Drogo for speaking the common tongue when he says, "A crown for the king." Number of deaths, 4. Episode 7, You Win or You Die. Episode 7 just keeps the momentum going as everything starts falling either into or out of place, depending on your perspective. We are finally introduced to Tywin Lannister, and he lives up to his reputation. He's preparing for war with the Starks in order to take over the kingdom. At the wall, Jon and Sam say their vows and are named stewards. Jon is offended as he wanted to be a ranger, but Sam sees it as grooming for command as he is assigned to the Lord Commander. While out saying their vows, Ghost finds the bodies of some dead rangers. In Vise Dothrak, Jorah stops Daenerys from drinking poison. Drogo, wanting revenge, declares he will take the Iron Throne for his and Daenerys' child. Back at King's Landing, Ned tells Cersei he knows her secret and intends to tell Robert upon his return. Bad news, though, as Robert was mortally wounded by a boar. On his deathbed, Ned writes his will and testament, but rewords it to rightful heir instead of Joffrey. Ned sends a letter to Stannis to inform him that he is the rightful heir. but Renly wants to take over instead. Ned doesn't agree to Renly's plan, so he leaves the capital. Ned, needing more men, turns to Littlefinger, for the Goldcloak's help, to take Joffrey into custody. When they arrive at the throne room, Cersei ignores the will, so Ned commands the Goldcloaks to take Joffrey, but they turn against him, and Littlefinger holds a dagger to Ned's throat, arresting him. Everything is paying off at this point. The mystery came together, the wars are underway, and the king is dead, so the game may begin. I really like Tywin's introduction with the symbolism of skinning a stag, the symbol of House Baratheon, before Robert ends up dying, due to the Lannisters. MVP of the episode could go to a few people, but I'll go with Cersei. She kept her cool and came out on top. The biggest loser is easily Ned. He did everything wrong here. He told Cersei his plans, didn't take up Renly on his offer, and trusted Littlefinger. Best quote goes to Cersei for her line, "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die." Number of deaths, 2. 3 if you count a character we later find out was killed and revived off screen. Episode 8, The Pointy End. This one, while it has quite a bit of death and violence, feels like the calm before the storm. At Winterfell, Robb calls his bannermen to go to war. In the Vale, Catelyn receives word of Robb's declaration of war, and Lysa refuses to send the Knights of the Vale to help. Tyrion meets up with some tribesmen whom he recruits for the Lannister army. Catelyn reaches Robb's camp, and they plan their attack. Tyrion and his tribesmen reach Tywin's camp, and they prepare for attack. At the Wall, Jon gets into trouble for acting out after finding out what's happening down south. But he redeems himself when the corpses they found previously come back to life and he defeats them, saving the Lord Commander. Overseas, Daenerys is preventing women from being raped and murdered by the Dothraki. This upsets one Dothraki blood rider, and Khal Drogo defeats him in combat, but is wounded in the process. In King's Landing, the Lannisters are taking full control, killing or capturing all associated with the Starks. Syrio Forel defends Arya's escape, and Arya accidentally kills a stable boy, but manages to get away. Sansa is manipulated into writing a letter to Robb to bend the knee and swear fealty to Joffrey. She later begs for Joffrey to show mercy on her father. This episode, like I said, feels like a moment of calm and preparation for the wars to come. In later seasons, the editors do some cuts from one thing to another similar thing elsewhere fairly often, but this episode feels like the start of that, or at least to a larger extent. The opening is great, showing people fighting in the streets and cutting to Arya training with Syrio Forel. They do a similar cut later when they go from Jon setting a corpse on fire to a village being burnt by the Dothraki. MVP of this episode goes to Robb for gaining the support of his bannermen, not backing down with the odds stacked against him, and coming up with a plan of attack. The biggest loser for this episode is Sansa, just for her naivete, not standing up for her family, and then believing Joffrey would show any mercy. The best quote goes to a duo of Syrio and Arya when he asks, "What do we say to the god of death?" and Arya replies, "Not today." Number of deaths, 7. Episode 9, Baelor. The 9th episodes of this series gained a reputation for being where the big moments happen, and that starts here. The biggest moments happen in the Riverlands and King's Landing, so we'll leave those for last, and start overseas where Khal Drogo's wounds have become infected, and he will likely die, so Daenerys tells the witch Mirri Maz Dur to use blood magic to save him. Other Dothraki dislike this idea and attack her, but Jorah saves her. Daenerys is about to give birth, but none of the midwives want to help her, so Jorah brings her to the witch during the ritual. Up at the Wall, the Lord Commander rewards Jon with a Valyrian steel sword. but Jon still wants to go south to help his father and brother. He talks to Maester Aemon, who tells him his backstory of love and duty. In the Riverlands, Robb's plan of attack requires crossing a bridge controlled by the Freys, who will only give him passage after he agrees to marry one of the Frey girls, along with a few other requirements. Robb agrees. On the Lannister side, Tywin puts Tyrion and his tribesmen in the vanguard. Thinking this will lead to his death, Tyrion decides to party with Bronn and a prostitute named Shae. The next morning, the fight will happen, but Tyrion is knocked out before it even begins. He awakes to find out they won, but it was only a diversion so Robb's men could sneak past on the Freys bridge and capture Jaime. Down in King's Landing, Ned is about to be executed, but is told if he declares himself a traitor and Joffrey as true king, he will be spared. He does this for the sake of his daughters, who he worries will be tortured otherwise. Instead of being spared, however, Joffrey still commands his head be removed. This is the episode that set Game of Thrones apart from all other fantasy and television series, by killing off the character who, up to this point, is portrayed as the main protagonist. Knowing Sean Bean's reputation, I suspected it would happen, but it was still shocking for me to see. MVP of this episode goes to Robb yet again. He made an alliance and pulled off his plan. The biggest loser of the episode has to be Ned. He didn't stick to his values of honor above all, and it backfired. He still died for it. The best quote is a line that I think speaks for the whole episode, spoken by Maester Aemon. Love is the death of duty. Number of deaths? 2. Episode 10, Fire and Blood, the finale of Season 1, and what a way to cap it off. A lot of this episode deals with the aftermath of Ned's death. In King's Landing, Sansa is being forced to look at her father's decapitated head. She finally sees Joffrey for the monster he truly is. Arya has been taken under the protection of Yoren of the Night's Watch. He cuts her hair and disguises her as the boy Ari, who he'll take back up north, joined by Gendry. At the Wall, after hearing of his father's death, Jon attempts to leave, but is stopped by his new brothers. Lord Commander Mormont, knowing there is a greater threat, decides to lead a ranging party north of the Wall. Jon and Sam get to go with him. In the Riverlands, Robb and the Northmen are grieving Ned's death, and decide they won't support any southern king like Joffrey or Stannis, but want a king of their own, and declare Robb as the king in the north. At the Lannister camp, Tywin is upset that Jaime has been captured, and with Tyrion being the only one to see they lost their bargaining chip by killing Ned, he commands that Tyrion be handed the king in his stead. Overseas, Daenerys' baby died in childbirth, his life being taken as a part of the blood magic ritual, but even Khal Drogo is barely alive, just being a vegetable. So Daenerys smothers him to take him out of his misery. Daenerys has the Dothraki build of pyre for Drogo, and ties Mirri Maz Dur to it as well. She places her dormant dragon eggs in it too, and once the fires begin, she walks into it. Once the smoke settles, all that is left are ashes, and in the middle sits Daenerys, still alive, but holding 3 baby dragons. I like the way they showed that Ned's death had an effect on everyone in Westeros, even the Lannisters. It also finally brings in the dragons, and gets viewers excited for where Daenerys and everyone else's stories will go. MVP of the episode, of course, goes to Daenerys for coming out of the fire alive and with dragons. The biggest loser goes to Mirri Maz Dur, who not only dies, but dies screaming when she herself said she wouldn't. Best quote for this one goes to Great John Umber when he declares Robb the king in the north. Number of deaths, 3. So that's every episode from Season 1. Overall, this season is great. The production value, though not quite as high as later seasons, is still excellent. The writing in this season and other early seasons feels so much stronger, with the great wordplay, foreshadowing, and dialogue that isn't just witty for the sake of being quotable. My favorite character of the season is Ned Stark. This is his season, and while he doesn't come out on top, he's really hard not to like. I might do more of these on the rest of the series if there is interest in it, and I have the time to. So let me know if you would like to see that. And what are your favorite moments from Season 1?